We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis Maseches Zvachim. This is Zvachim Daf 33b. On the previous Daf, the Gemara brought a statement from Ula from Reish Lakish that Bia b'mixas is considered Bia. What that means is that if someone sticks his hands into the Azara, even though only part of him is in the Azara, that's considered to be entering the Azara. Therefore, if he'd be Tameh and he would stick his hands into the Azara, so he would get Malchus in such a situation. Again, that was the statement from Ula from Reish Lakish. And on the previous Daf, the Gemara had asked a question from a Brisa that had to do with Mitzorah. In that Brisa, it mentions the idea that when the Mitzorah goes on to Harabayas, let's say the Mitzorah is on the final day of his purification process, the case over there was Erev Pesach, and let's say he's also a Tvul Yom, so it mentioned over there that as a Tvul Yom entering the Harabayas, so it is not an Aseh, that's not a violation of an Aseh with Kares, it might not even be technically an Aseh, but the Gemara asked, what do you mean? When he's going to stick his hands into the Azara, isn't that an Aseh? That does involve Kares, because already over there, if we're holding Bia b'mixas, it's considered Bia, so it's like he entered the Azara. And the Gemara answers that question now with another answer as follows. Ravina Amar Ravina says, Le'inyan Malkus Itmar. The statement of Ula from Reish Lakish was only that Bia b'mixas is considered Bia, it's considered entering the Azara as far as Malkus is concerned, but it is not an issue of Kares. Rashi explains, Ravina Amar Hadamar Ula La'el, that which Ula said earlier, Mishmei de Reish Lakish, in the name of Reish Lakish, B'Bia b'mixas, by Bias Mixas, again, where you're entering partially into the Azara, Le'inyan Malkus Amar, that was only for Malkus. Kedekamar, Loka B'Hedya, that's exactly what he actually said. He said he gets Malkus. Avalo Le'inyan Kares, but it would not be Kares. In other words, if you enter in that fashion into the Azara, and you're Tameh, you're not going to get Kares. To Tosve Mitzorah, and again, that was what the basis of the question was from Mitzorah Shara Keri, from the Mitzorah who also became a Bal Keri. Again, that was the case of the Tvul Yom. Techi Iskash Biol and Negia, because when there's a comparison of entering to touching, which is the whole basis of this idea of Bia b'mixas, li'azhara iskish, it's only a comparison for the azhara, for the warning. Kedechsiv, as it's written, lo savo, don't come. Avolo onesh lo iskish, but they're not compared as far as the punishment. De'ein onesh b'negia, because there is no punishment when it comes to touching, and so therefore, again, we're only talking about Malchus. It's not really a question from that case of Mitzorah. And the Gemara continues with an entirely different approach regarding the statement of Reish Lakish. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Avo. When Ravin came, he said that Rabbi Avo said, Le'inyan Tameh Shenaga B'Kodesh Itmar. Actually, the statement of Reish Lakish had nothing to do with Bia b'mixas at all. He was actually talking about somebody who's Tameh, who touches Kodesh. The Itmar, as it was stated, the following Machlokas Amoraim, Tameh Shenaga B'Kodesh, a person who's Tameh touches Kodesh. Reish Lakish Amar Loka. Reish Lakish says he gets Malchus. That's actually the Malchus that Reish Lakish was referring to. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says there is no Malchus. Reish Lakish Amar Loka. Reish Lakish says there's Malchus. B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga. It's learned from the pasuk of B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga. That's exactly what the pasuk is talking about. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says there's no Malchus because Ahu B'Truma Ksiv. That pasuk is written with regards to Truma. Rashi explains L'Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh Itmar. Again, the statement of Reish Lakish was by a Tamei who touches Kodesh. Lo Yolef Reish Lakish Malchus Me'ahu Kra. When Reish Lakish learns out Malchus from that pasuk, it's Elo L'Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh. He's only talking about a person who's Tamei who touches Kodesh. V'lo Ayri B'Bias Mikdash Klal. He's not talking about entering the Beis HaMikdash at all. And again, Rabbi Yochanan says that pasuk is B'Truma Ksiv. It's written by Truma. Kidemukach Sefer Dekra. That becomes clear at the end of the pasuk. Ad Melos Yimei Tara Sheyariv Shimsha Shi Tevulas Yomarach. There it's talking about a woman who gave birth and she finishes the days of purity. She's considered like a Tvul Yom, but it's a long Tvul Yom over many days. Shetovelas B'Shvila Leidasa. When the woman gives birth, what happens is she immerses on the seventh day from when she gives birth. V'chol Yimei Toar Shelah. And then you have what's called the days of purity. All of those days of purity. He ketvulas yom. She's considered like a tvul yom. Uviyom mem v'yechon mevia karbona. Then on the 41st day, she brings her carbon. Umichsev lo siga ad melos. Now, from the fact that it's written she shouldn't touch until she finishes those days. Avol mishayimlu yameh siga. But once those days are finished, she is allowed to touch. V'afilu mechusares kapar. Even though she's lacking atonement, she hasn't brought the carbon. Al karchach b'truma ksiv. You have to say that's talking about truma. Delinyan kodesh, because when it comes to kodesh, if we're talking about touching something that is kodesh, ad shatavi kaparasa, then she would have to bring her kapara. She would have to have brought her carbon, her atonement. V'hachi mukminan l'hai krabi yavamas be'arel. That's how we understand this pasuk in Yavamas. V'kevan de v'truma ksiv. Now, since this pasuk is written by Truma, lo yalfinon malchus to kodesh. You can't learn out malchus of kodesh. V'afilo b'kal v'chomer. You can't even learn it out using a kal v'chomer truma to kodesh. De'in mazhirin min adin, because you cannot create a warning based on a kal v'chomer. But the Gemara continues and asks, Reish Lakish haikra lahach Yehuda. Also, does Reish Lakish really use this pasuk for this halacha, meaning this pasuk of Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga? Is that really used, according to Reish Lakish, for Tamei Shenaga Bekodesh? That's not true. Because Haimi Boile, because really Reish Lakish needs the pasuk of Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga for something else. He needs it for the following, Azhara Lo'ochel Besar Kodesh. He needs it for a warning for somebody who eats meat that is holy. Rashi explains, Lo'ochel Besar Kodesh Betumas Haguf. We're talking about someone who is Tamei, and then he eats meat that is Kodesh. That's what the pasuk is talking about. The Itmar, because it was stated the following, Machlokas Amoraim. Azhara Lo'ochel Besar Kodesh Minayin. From where do we know a warning that somebody who's Tamei is not allowed to eat meat that is Kodesh? Reish Lakish Amar Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga. Reish Lakish uses this exact pasuk. Reish Lakish says it's because of the pasuk of Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Tani Bardala taught, Asya Tomaso mi Bias Mikdash. We learn it from Gzeir Shaveh, Tomaso from Bias Mikdash. Malahalan, just like over there, Onash V'Hizir, there's a punishment and there's a warning. Afkan Onash V'Hizir. So too over here, there's a punishment and a warning. And Rashi explains, Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga. Again, Reish Lakish uses Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga, talking about eating Besar Kodesh. V'Darshina L'Kamon, we're going to darshan later on, as Hora Lo'ochel, that it's actually a warning for eating. And again, Rabbi Yochanan, he learns it from Tumaso. The Gemara said he brought from Bardala. It's a Gzeir Shaveh. Ksiv Bekares, it says by Kares, Ba'ochel Kodesh, Betumas Haguf, somebody eats Kodesh, Betumas Haguf, when the person is Tamei, V'Tumaso Olav. It says the words V'Tumaso Olav. Uchsib Bias Mikdash, and it says by Bias Mikdash, by entering the Beis HaMikdash, Od Tumaso Bo. It says he's still Tamei, talking about entering the Mikdash Tamei. Ma Bias Mikdash Iko Azhara, just like by Bias Mikdash there is a warning. The warning is V'lo Yitamus Machaneim, from the pasuk V'lo Yitamus Machaneim, Af Tumas Haguf De'ochel Kodesh. So too when somebody is Tamei and he eats Kodesh, Teipuklei Azhara Mehacha. We can learn the Azhara, we learn the warning from over here. So in other words, through the Gzeir Shaveh, you understand that there's a warning. We understand that there's a punishment. It says Kares, but we understand the warning as well through this Gzeir Shaveh. And the Gemara continues and answers, Tamei shenaga b'kodesh. Reish Lakish can learn out that if a Tamei person touches Kodesh, that he gets Malkus. That's learned mida afkar achmana b'loshen negia, from the fact that the Torah uses a language of negia, uses a language of touching, again in the pasuk b'chol Kodesh lo siga. It says lo siga. It's a language of negia, a language of touching. That's how we know Malkus again by Tamei shenaga b'kodesh. Azhara lo ochel, and the fact that this pasuk can be used as a warning for somebody who eats Besar Kodesh when he's Tamei. That's mida Iskish Kodesh LaMikdash. That's from the fact that there's a comparison between Kodesh and Mikdash. And Rashi explains, Umeshani, the Gemara answers, Tamei Shenaga. The way we learn out Tamei Shenaga, Nafkalon Mida Afke B'Loshen Negia. That's learned out from the fact that a language of touching is used in the pasuk. And Azhara La'ochel, the warning for eating, meaning Iker Kra Midrash. There we're darshaning the pasuk, the main pasuk, Mida Iskish Kodesh LaMikdash B'Hai Kra, from the fact that Kodesh is compared to Mikdash in this pasuk. Darshinim, we darshan Ma'bias Mikdash, just like by entering the Beis HaMikdash, Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares, that's something that involves Kares. Afaz Haras Kodesh, so too the warning in this pasuk about Kodesh, Davar Sheyesh Bo Kares, it's got to be something involving Kares. V'hainu Achila, so it must be talking about eating when the person is Tameh, he eats Besar Kodesh, that involves Kares, the Ilu B'Negia, because by Negia, by simply touching, Lo Eshkechon Kares, we don't find Kares. Umiu, now nevertheless, Azhara L'Nogeya, the warning for someone who touches, Nafkol on Mineh, we do learn from this pasuk, Mida Afke B'Loshen Negia, from the fact that the pasuk has a language of Negia, of touching. And just to see the full pasuk, again, the pasuk is talking about a yoledis, a woman who gives birth, who shloshim yom u'shloshas yamim teishev b'dmei tahara. She sits for 33 days in the blood of purity. B'chol kodesh lo siga. That's the part of the pasuk that talks about touching. And then it says ve'la mikdash lo tavo. She shouldn't enter into the Beis HaMikdash. That talks about entering the mikdash. That's the comparison between kodesh and mikdash. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavase de Reish Lakish. We have a brisa that supports Reish Lakish. Rashi explains, Tanya Kavase de Reish Lakish, da azhara la'ochel kodesh mehacha, that the warning for eating kodesh comes from here, comes from this pasuk. And the brisa says, B'chol kodesh lo siga, the pasuk says you can't touch kodesh. Azhara la'ochel, this is a warning about eating, again, exactly like Reish Lakish. Ata omer azhara la'ochel oeino elo l'nogeh, you're saying it's a warning for eating, maybe it's only for touching. Talmud lomer b'chol kodesh lo siga, v'ela mikdash lo savu. The pasuk says she can't touch kodesh, and it says she can't enter the mikdash. Makish kodesh lo mikdash, that's a comparison between kodesh and mikdash. Ma mikdash davar sheyesh bo, just like by the mikdash, it's something which involves kares, as we said, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph.